companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Thom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Thom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Thom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom.
We say fight back!
Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is Just Another N-Word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest bad N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examine the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of it had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. Gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring things with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pill was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house. She was his neighbor. On the one hand,
this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, TGIF. It is here, Friday. Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. Happy Friday. Yesterday, Joe Biden had a press conference. Yesterday, Georgia changed the world. We'll get to both. It's Anything Goes Friday. As I said, I'll be taking your calls on whatever you'd like to talk about today, although I have a couple things I want to lay on the table. And in the second hour of our program, that entire hour, we're going to do a National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Khanna, who represents the 17th District of California. And he will be taking your calls for the entire hour. So if you've got a question you want to ask Congressman Khanna, just hang on to the second hour of our program, and he will be with us. So, number one, Joe Biden's press conference over at thewriting.com. That's R-I-G, not W, but R, thewriting.com. They saw, basically, their subtitle is Alerting Liberal Audiences to Today's Headlines from the Right. I would say, we read right-wing news so you don't have to. But here's what conservative Americans, Republican Americans, were getting from their media about yesterday's press conference. I'm guessing you caught parts of it. I described on the air in the third hour of our program yesterday after it was over, basically all the major points that Joe Biden touched on. And some of the questions were just stupid. Are you going to run for a second term? Anytime you ask any president that, anytime certainly in his or her, well, it's always been his up to this point, but in any case, anytime you ask him, anytime in his first 2, 3, even early 4 years, the answer is going to be, of course. Because who wants to declare 2 months into their presidency that they're that they're already a lame duck? It just doesn't happen. It was a stupid question. And then it was followed up with, well, is Kamala Harris going to be your running? I mean, give me a break. It was like the press corps. Anyhow, here's the Washington Times. The headline, Biden press conference was elder abuse. It was an hour of incoherent babbling, except when President Joe Biden read directly from his talking points. The questions were polite and predictable from pre-selected approved reporters, right? Fox News. Biden's first press conference leaves Americans with more questions than answers. Kayleigh McEnany, at his first press conference, Biden offers confusing and completely unacceptable answers. Western Journal, Biden lapsed into nonsense during first solo presidential press conference. The next one, Biden, this is from CNS News, Biden suffers 4-second mental meltdown, struggles to move on to the next question. Thursday at his press conference as president, Joe Biden appeared to forget what he was saying, then became so confused that he struggled to move on to a new topic. WND, WorldNet Daily, Biden survives his first press conference barely. He lost his train of thought, assuming he had one. He forgot some of the questions that were asked. He continually flipped through a notebook, strange to see among past commanders-in-chief, and read prepared answers. What an ugly scene. Oh, man. I went back and watched parts of it. It happened while I was on the air yesterday, and I thought he did a great job. I mean, it was so nice to see an American president actually answering questions honestly, which is not all that common, or at least it hasn't been all that common in the last 4 years. But I think the bigger news, and really the only story of the day, is what happened in Georgia yesterday. Brian Kemp, the governor, who became governor by refusing to allow 50 some odd thousand, he won by only 50,000 votes, and Stacey Abrams had registered 53,000 black voters. And after he purged a couple 100,000 people, including a lot of black voters, off the voting rolls the previous year, this was 2017, in 2018, when he was running against Stacey Abrams, he was still Secretary of State, and he refused to let her 53,000 black voters go on the voting rolls. And then he won the election by 50,000 votes. That guy. He's now the governor because of that. And he signed this legislation yesterday. It was introduced into the House of Representatives in Georgia. It passed the House. It was introduced into the Senate in Georgia. It passed the Senate. It was sent to the governor. It was signed by the governor, all in less than 10 hours. It's called a blitzkrieg. So Milton Mayer, back in 1953-54, went to Germany and befriended 10 average Germans and asked them, how did this happen? And this is what one of them said. This is in Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free, which is it used to be out of print for a while, and I started ranting about it on the air, and now it's back in print, which is just great. Anyhow, this is from his book. He's quoting one of the Germans who survived the Nazis. The guy was a college professor. He says, what happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise, to receiving decisions deliberated in secret, to believing that the situation was so complicated that the government had to act on information which the people couldn't understand, or so dangerous that even if the people could understand it, it couldn't be released because of national security. I mean, Kemp did the exact same thing that Jeb Bush did for his brother George back in 2000, blowing black people off the voting rolls. And now, well, the German who was talking to Milton Mayer continues, as if he had been living in Georgia or Iowa or Wisconsin for the past decade. And by the way, you can read this for free with no advertisements or anything over at HartmannReport.com. I put my daily rants there 7 days a week right now. You can also get it in your email box for free, no ads, nothing like that. It's just this is what I do. I am committed to this. And but anyhow, as I said, this continues. This is one of those Germans in 1953-54 that Milton Mayer was talking about in his book that was published in 55. Quote, this separation of government from the people, this widening of the gap took place so gradually and so insensibly, each step disguised as a temporary emergency measure or associated with true patriotic allegiance or with real social purposes. And all the crises and reforms so occupied the people that they didn't see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me, unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us had ever had the occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must one day lead to, One no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing. And then, one day, it is over his head. This is where we're at. And he goes on to say, you see, you don't know exactly how or where to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when the shock comes, will join you in resisting. You don't want to act or talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. And then yesterday, Georgia State Representative Park Khanna, a black woman, elected legislator, was arrested for knocking on Governor Kemp's door as he and his all-white, all-male contingent signed this bill. She was arrested by an all-white police force as he was signing his gutting democracy bill, as the German told Milton Mayer. But that one great shocking occasion when tens or hundreds of thousands will join with you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and the smallest, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 43 had come right after the German firm stickers on the windows in non-Jewish shops in 33. You know, President Obama warned us about this and specifically cited Nazis, the rise of Nazi Germany. And he did this while Donald Trump was president. I will share his quote with you on the other side of this break, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. And one last thing I wanted to tell you about. We had a poll yesterday over on our YouTube channel. We asked, should members of Congress force to look at the dead victims of gun violence? 61% yes with the agreement of the families, 36% yes, show them to everybody.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And only 3% said no, keep the photos hidden so we can't see what happens with guns. I think it was predictable, but it's still a kind of cool poll. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Nola in Inglewood, California. Hey, Nola, what's on your mind today?
Thank you. Nola Frank Gray. Yeah. The reason why you asked why the Republicans wanted to have so many Americans die from COVID. It's simple. The Republican Party wants Biden to fail so that Biden and Harris will serve only one term.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about right now, why is it that they're continuing to fight mask mandates and they're continuing to spread misinformation about vaccines? I completely agree with you, Nola. And the more people, if they can get 500,000 people to die on Biden's watch, they can say, see, the Democrat killed just as many people as the Republican did. I mean, I don't think Biden is going to allow that to happen, but if this South African variant or another variant like it starts sweeping across America, it's already attacking Michigan as we speak. If it starts sweeping across America, as it almost certainly will, and we don't have 70-80% vaccination, it's going to be a screaming disaster. Say what, Noel?
But it doesn't even have to be that many affected. All that needs to happen is for Biden to not be able to maintain his promise of things being set on July 4th. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Very well said. Thank you very much for the call. Jessica in Chicago watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yes, I love your poll on the gun violence, by the way. And
thank you.
Georgia is showing their true colors. It's the strongest shade of white supremacists. When the sore losers make it a crime to have food or water in line. And President Biden was right when he said, will there even be a Republican Party? Because Republicans, I know, they're changing to independence. And the stop the steal phrase, it should be stop the greed. Sore loser insurrectionists know Trump lost. They're just scared they're going to lose all their privileged lifestyles.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Jessica. And with regard to the stop the steal thing, I am convinced that was a program, you know, because people are like, wow, this was actually really well organized. The more we learn about this, I mean, you know, this was really well organized. How did that happen so quickly? I think that Donald Trump and Roger Stone put this thing together back in 2016, anticipating that Hillary Clinton would win the election and that Donald Trump would then begin his Stop the Steal, and it would become a whole new fundraiser thing, and maybe he could even grab the White House. But I think they just pulled out a program that they had put together 4 years earlier on the assumption that Trump was going to lose, and recycled it.
And you have to include Flynn in there. He traveled abroad to all these countries that had uprisings, and he knew how to indoctrinate people. He indoctrinated Trump base.
Yep. I am completely with you, and he's become, you know, kind of a touchstone, a cultural icon for them. And the guy, as far as I can tell, is a full-blown fascist. Jessica, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We're coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with my quote from Barack Obama, a last quote from one of Milton Mayer's Germans, and your phone calls on Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives. Let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, you know, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history, with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. It was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. So welcome back. So this is what President Barack Obama. Pardon my delay here. I was trying to get back to my post today here. This is what President Barack Obama had to say in December of 2017. Now, keep in mind, in December of 2017, Donald Trump was president. It was the first full year of his presidency. In fact, it was toward the end of the first full years of his presidency. And this is what former President Barack Obama said. And I quote, "You have to tend to this garden of democracy. Otherwise, things can fall apart fairly quickly. And we've seen societies where that happened." Now, presumably, and this is where he goes right to the Nazis, right? Again, quoting Obama. Now, presumably, there was a ballroom in Vienna in the late 1920s or 30s that looked and seemed as if it filled with music and art and literature and the science that was emerging, as if it would continue into perpetuity. And then 60 million people died, and the entire world was plunged into chaos. You know, the warnings have been there all along. Matt Albright wrote a book about it. The New York Times has a brilliant piece. There's a link to it in my post over at HartmannReport.com. It's actually a video. It's about a 15-minute video or maybe 10-minute video about the rise of fascism in America, featuring Jason Stanley, the guy who wrote several books about this. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has come right out and used the F word. She says, you know, fascism, and so, you know, which gives us our final quote from Milton Mayer's German friend back in 1954. He said, you know, he was talking about, you expect that, you know, if the government is going to be taken over, that the people will rise up. And he says, Quote, but of course this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. Step C is not so much worse than step B, and if you didn't take a stand at step B, why should you at step C? And so on to step D. And one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. Now keep in mind, this is this German that Milton Mayer, the reporter from Chicago, befriended in 1953-54 in Germany. He says, the burden of self-deception has grown too heavy. And some minor incident, in my case, my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, Jews, swine, collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed and changed completely under your nose. And I'll tell you, that's what Georgia is waking up to this morning. And in fact, you know, the title of my piece today is Georgians are waking up to Governor Kemp's authoritarian takeover. This naked assault on democracy sets the stage for other Republican-controlled states to do the same. And the GOP is now openly and publicly talking about cloning this Georgia law in Republican state after Republican state. And one of the things it does is it puts the Republicans who control the legislature in charge of deciding what really happened with the vote. And if they don't like the way the vote went, they can change it, just Donald Trump tried to get them to do. Back to Milton Mayer's German friend, the world you live in, your nation, your people, now is not the world you were in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring, the houses, the shops, the jobs, the meal times, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms. The spirit has changed. And now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. And now you live in a system which rules without responsibility even to God. That's where we're at right now. This is how bad it is. Anyway, oh, we just have a minute, Sean? Okay, I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of the break. I want to point out that, and toward the end of the book, Milton Mayer asked back to the college professor, he asked him, how is this to be avoided among ordinary men, even highly educated ordinary men? And the answer, frankly, I don't know. But we are different from that German college professor in 1953 who, was a German college professor in 1933 when Hitler seized power in Germany. We are different because we can look back and see what Hitler did in Germany. We can, right now, look at Hungary, which, by the way, Freedom House just rated us below Hungary in terms of democracy, which was taken over by an authoritarian strongman by the name of Viktor Orban just 2 years ago. Hungary was a democracy. They're a member of the European Union. They're not a democracy any longer. Now they're an oligarchy. They're run by a bunch of rich guys who own all the media and all the dissidents, and anybody who was doing radio in Germany like I'm doing right now, they're all in jail. Excuse me, in Hungary. They're all in jail right now. So we have, we can look at other countries and say, holy cow, they couldn't back in the 30s.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So we must end the filibuster and pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, to reverse this insane Georgia law.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether.
Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debt should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land, where his other rules, and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. This week on The Science Revolution is Dr. Justin Frank, author of the Trump, Obama, and Bush on the Couch series of books. He's here on how to deal with trauma of the pandemic and the trauma of 4-year Trump. It's been a stressful time. Some of us have lost family and friends and have found it difficult to stay safe and pay the bill. The Trump years have been a challenge to democracy and our sanity. Dr. Justin Frank is here to help. Tune into The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. What about Anything Goes Friday? So in the Great Minds Think Alike category, I posted my rant over a Democratic Underground this morning. And a person who posts under the name Lawdem, L-A-W-D-E-M, replied to the post saying, from the Patriot's Grill, yes, my novel. So this fellow has written a novel titled The Patriot's Grill, G-R-I-L-L. He says, an old man, one of just a few people old enough to remember something called democracy, is speaking to a bartender in 2099. Quote, no, we didn't wake up one morning to find tanks in the streets, if that's what you're asking. Nothing so melodramatic. It was more like a young boy becomes an old man, slowly, day by day. And then you wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and find yourself exclaiming, my God, how did I get to be this old? Well, that's how freedom died, and each at a time over decades. That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. Anyhow, let's pick phone calls. What a day, huh? Burl in Sierra Vista, Arizona. Burl, what's up?
Hi, Tom. A few days ago, you made a comment when you were talking about an assault weapons ban, something along the line of that people should see the pictures of bodies that have been hit with .223 caliber bullets.
I did.
And okay, yeah, I'm a Vietnam combat vet, so I've actually seen the bodies. And I absolutely agree with you that civilians should not be allowed to own military weapons. And I agree that the pictures should be shown daily.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also, by the way, I've been a gun owner since I was 12. I own guns today, not an assault weapon among them.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I mean, what do you need an assault weapon for unless you're planning on doing a mass shooting? I mean, they're weapons of war. That's what they are. No. Burl, thank you for saying it so eloquently. I truly appreciate it. And yeah, and what I was calling for too, by the way, is that we do it carefully and thoughtfully, that we involve the media. In fact, it should be an initiative of the media so that people who could be triggered into PTSD by seeing these pictures have the option of not seeing them. You know, you don't just splash them all over the front page newspapers, but people need to understand that this is not like a Wild West movie where the gun goes bang and the guy falls over and goes, "Oh, you got me." And that's not how it happens. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of screaming, there's a lot of thrashing around, and the after effect. Well, like I said yesterday, in Newtown, they said that some of the children, their heads were so badly exploded by these bullets that they had to use DNA to identify them. That's the reality of mass shootings in America today, with the kind of weapon that this guy used in this, although apparently it's been modified to look like a pistol, but that's the kind of weapon that this guy used in that supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. Burl, thank you for the call. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russ, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Oh, yeah, Tom. I just wanted to ask you a question. 2 weeks ago, you told me about Joe Manchin was a Democrat. But it seems like he's the only one, Tom, that if I don't get 10 Republicans to vote with me, I ain't voting for nothing. The Voting Act, Women's Act, nothing. He's in concrete. Right. Because I'll tell you something right now, Tom. There was a party, I don't know what they were last Sunday on Johnson State Park from West Virginia, and they said, they're mounting the big charge, not telling everybody, don't put him back in. He's a phony. Because they're sick of his garbage about the filibuster back home, Tom. I mean, you're not going to vote for a Voting Rights Act, Tom? Because unless you get 10 Republicans, you know they're loving this on the other side. You believe he's still a true Democrat?
Well, I see two paths for Joe Manchin, Russ, and I hope he takes the one that I frankly think he's going to take. I don't think Manchin is a dumb guy. I think he's a very smart man, and he's trying to play the politics of a state that Donald Trump won by over 20 points. So
40.
That said, say that again?
Supposedly the guy that said that he's tired of it. It's 40 points. I thought we lost that state.
Trump won by 40 points? Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me in West Virginia.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it may well be. So here's what I think, Russ. I think one of these things is going to happen. Either Joe Manchin is going to get pushed hard enough that he just decides, to hell with it, I'm going to pull a Jim Jeffords, and he's going to become an independent and caucus with the Republicans, or even become a Republican, which is what the governor of West Virginia did, Jim Justice. He was elected as a Democrat. He became a Republican. That's a possibility, and that's a possibility that Democrats have to be terrified of, because if that happens, they lose control of the Senate, and Mitch McConnell's back in charge. The other thing that I think is possible, and I think is frankly more possible, more likely, is that Joe Manchin did not say that there needs to be 10 Republicans to vote for this bill. He did not say this in the context of the filibuster. What he said was he thinks it should be bipartisan. And it may be that there are 1 or 2 or 3 Republicans who will actually go along with this legislation. I would put Lisa Murkowski at the top of that list, possibly Susan Collins, maybe Mitt Romney. But you know, for all we know, Russ, and this is me being the sunny optimist, and I could be completely wrong on this, right? But I'm watching this play out, and I'm watching how Manchin is doing this dance. And I've been watching him for a long time, since we lived in the same arena in Washington, D.C. I think that he's got one Republican who is, if not going to vote for it, at least give some kind of vocal support for it, so that he will have the cover to say that it was done on a bipartisan basis, which is what he's trying to do. And it will pass. If he can't get that, I believe that he will go along with an effort that Schumer will put forward to alter the rules of the filibuster, which have already been altered twice in the last 2 administrations. You know, I guess it was Mitch McConnell, and I'm not sure who the Democrat was, if it was Harry Reid or it was McConnell both times. But it used to be that you could filibuster any judge, and that got done away with, so that Mitch McConnell could pack the court, you know, the federal bench. And it used to be that you could filibuster a Supreme Court nominee, and that got done away with. Those both got done away with, like in the last 6 years or so. So all they have to do is say, we're going to alter the filibuster so you can't filibuster any kind of legislation that has to do with democracy in America, or that has to do with voting rights, or that has to do with civil rights. You know, any of those rubrics, this H.R. 1 would fall under. And that will allow them to pass H.R. 1. Or the other alteration would be the one that I'm calling for, which is to say, okay, yeah, we're going to keep the filibuster. We're going to call it the Jimmy Stewart filibuster. And as long as 40 people are on the floor, and you have to keep 40 people on the floor continuously, and one of them has to continuously talk. As long as that happens, you can prevent a vote from happening. But the minute you go below 40, there is an automatic vote called, and majority wins. And you know, and that's not a radical thing. That is taking the filibuster back to what the vast majority, I'm guessing well over 90% of Americans believe the filibuster actually is. It's the way the filibuster was portrayed in the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington by Jimmy Stewart. So that's what I'd like to see. So that's where I'm at, Russ. And hopefully I'm right. God only knows. It's you know, I'm right sometimes and I'm wrong sometimes. Barbara in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Hi, I wanted to comment about the new Georgia voting laws. When Governor Khanna was announcing his signing, there was a black female state senator outside knocking on the door trying to get in. The state police arrested her, charged her with 2 felonies, and she's facing, 10 to 20 years in jail.
Yeah, her name is Park Cannon, and she is the one brave person who stood up to this. God bless her. But
charging her with interfering with government business, that concerns me, that might be how the Republicans are going to deal with all the protesters and demonstrators once they sign the different states pass more of the laws.
Count on it. Count on it. And the GOP announced yesterday that they're putting together a commission. They've got about 20 of these right-wing cranks who are Trump humpers. And you know, what's going to happen is in 2024, either Donald Trump is going to run for re-election, or somebody very much like Donald Trump, Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz or Rick Scott, is going to be the Republican nominee. And they're going to pull the same thing. And you're going to have a half a dozen Republican-controlled states where the majority of the people vote for the Democrat, vote for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, whoever happens to be running in 2024. And they're going to say, you know, we've found some irregularities with some of these votes in some of these heavily Democratic counties, so we're just going to throw those votes out. And they're going to hand the election to this neo-fascist Republican, whether it's Trump or whether it's one of the Trump humpers. And you know, this is as obvious as the nose on our faces. I mean, it's just like, this is what's going to happen. They are setting it up. They just set it up in Georgia. By the way, 3 days ago they set it up in Iowa. Same deal. We're gonna have, you know, a commission. We're gonna give the state legislature the power to oversee the election, really decide what happened, if there's a problem or a conflict or a state. And you know, they're gonna try to do it in, I mean, you've got almost 300 pieces of legislation in 43 states now to restrict voting rights. Now that Georgia has created the gold standard, that's what's gonna start going viral in state after state after state controlled by Republicans. Mark my words. And the only thing that can stop it is H.R. 1. And the only thing that's stopping that is the filibuster.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. By the way, to just finish that Joe Manchin thing, if he can get one Republican, he ends up the hero. And welcome back. Lynn in El Segundo, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
I heard 2 days ago on KPFK an interview with a woman named Marilyn Marks, and I would really recommend that you try to interview her on the air. She's with an organization called Coalition for Good Governance.org, and what she was talking about was this new law, and she said that with the mail-in ballots, they will not require a signature for verification, but they will require like a driver's license number or a photocopy of a utility bill. And what she was emphasizing is how much this is going to set up elections in the future for voter fraud, doing away with the requirement of a signature, but requiring ID numbers. So I thought I'd throw that out for you to think about. And,
that's interesting, because signatures are biometric. It's harder to fake a signature than it is to fake an ID.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. I assumed that the whole reason why this new law is going to require, if you're going to mail-in vote, that you have to make a photostat, you have to make a copy. Photostat, I'm dating myself. Xerox, I'm dating myself. You have to make a copy of driver's license. Well, how many people have a copy machine at home? Right? Well, I mean, anybody with an income under probably $50,000 a year, maybe $40,000 a year, I can guarantee they don't have a copy machine at home. And go ahead.
Sorry. What you're saying is that that's not the requirement. They're not going to require a photocopy of a license. All they're going to ask for is the ID number, which means anybody who has a mail-in ballot coming to their home, anyone in the home or not in the home could take that ballot as long as they know the number and forge the ballot. It's something I really recommend that you look into, because
that's fascinating.
It's
What's
serious.
the name of her organization again?
It's the website is coalitionforgoodgovernance.org. And her name is Marilyn Marks, and she's like the female Greg Palast. You really should check her out. She's really great.
Yeah, Sean and I are
a lot of lawsuits. She has a lot of lawsuits going, from previous years about the software that they've been using that's, not good for security. Anyway, thank you for your time, and have a good rest of your show.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Appreciate the call. Don't have quite enough time to pick up another call right this second. We got about 40 seconds to the break, but that's a really important point. And the other thing is that Georgia, I still think that back in 2004, the Georgia election, something really hinky happened, because all the election and all of the polls showed that Sonny Perdue was going to lose the election for United States Senate. And all the polls showed that, I forget who was running for governor that year, but that he was going to lose, and the Republican. And the exact same proportion that the polls showed the Republicans were going to lose, both the governor's race and the Senate race, the Republicans won by that proportion. It was almost like it was a mirror image. And Sonny Perdue getting into the Senate was the one thing that flipped the Senate. That vote in Georgia in 2004 was what flipped the Senate to the Republicans. And to this day, I think something was wrong with that, because there was no paper trail. There wasn't a single paper ballot in Georgia. It was all done on voting machines that had no paper trail. But it's not a wise idea these days, apparently, to trash voting machines. I'll just leave that out there. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. My Hidden History series has been growing. So far, I've taken on guns, the Supreme Court, voting, monopolies, oligarchy. They're available wherever fine books are sold. 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Harold in Missouri. Hey, Harold, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and you touched on it not too long ago. And the oligarchs own most of the Republicans, if not all, including Trump when he was in the White House, and a few Democrats too. And when the virus hit here, in my opinion, they contacted the politicians that they own and say, do nothing, because if it affects older people first, like me, and there's pushing 60 million of us, we'll get rid of a whole bunch of them, but the virus, and we will save our contribution to Social Security and possibly Medicare. And that is why Trump had no plan in place to fight the virus.
That may well be, Harold. I think the other thing that influenced his thinking was, because between February and April 7th, the Trump administration was actually planning on doing something. The post office getting ready to mail out 5 masks to every family in America. They were going to, they were following Anthony Fauci's advice. And on April 7th, that week of April 7th, everything changed, and suddenly Donald Trump started saying, it's a hoax, it's just like the flu, don't worry, we need to reopen. And what happened on April 7th was that was the day that the New York Times, the Washington Post, all the television networks all released this massive study showing that the majority of deaths were happening among black people, even though they are a minority of Americans, and that the majority of the deaths are happening in 3 blue states with Democratic governors. And I believe at that point, the Trump administration said, oh, this is mostly killing black people and old people like yourself, Harold. It says here you're 98. God bless you. I hope I get there. And so they said, yeah, it's just killing black people and old people, and it's doing it in states where you got a Democrat in charge. Why are we trying to stop this? This could work to our political advantage. And that was the point at which everything changed. April 7th, that was the day. You can go back and look. I've written about this, on my blog posts and things, and in fact, you can easily search it. And I really think that was it. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Harold, thank you for the call. Thank you so much for taking the time to call us and for sitting on hold for a while there. Anna Marie in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Anna Marie, says you're a kidney doctor?
I am a kidney doctor, and as a kidney doctor, I'm worried about a new condition called voting-induced kidney failure. If you stand in line for 6 to 7 hours without water and you're elderly and you have underlying problem, then you're going to get kidney failure. So I've already contacted a dialysis nurse in it. I know we're going to start a campaign. Kidney failure is called nephropathy by medical professionals. Mm-hmm. It's called Averting Voting Enhanced Nephropathy in Georgia Elections, or Avenge campaign to health professionals. So I'd love to hear from doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs in Georgia to contact their elected officials.
That is great. How can somebody who's listening right now get more information about this, Annie?
They can contact me directly at Dooley at cascadekidney.com, but I really would love to hear from professionals in Georgia at the moment. As I said, right now it's a possibility, but I would not be surprised to see kidney failure from voting. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So is that Dr. Dooley or DOCTOR? I mean, spell it out for us. So,
yeah, DRDOOLEY at cascadekidney, all one word, .com.
Cascade Kidney, great, like as in Cascade Mountains. Anna Marie, I hope that you get some good positive responses and, and very few bizarre emails. I can tell you what happens with those. But thank you very much for sharing that with us, and it adds another dimension to it. I mean, what is it that the Republicans, I mean, there is no low that they won't go below, it seems. Anna Marie, or Dr. Anna Marie, thank you so much. It's great to hear from you. Laura in Troy, Missouri. Hey, Laura, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I love your show. I had a quick question I was hoping you could answer. If Congress passes H.R. 1, will that block the state legislators from overturning election results like what they've just passed in Georgia?
Yes. To a large extent. It doesn't entirely stop everything that's in the Georgia law, and there will be lots of slicing and dicing both in the courts and in the legislatures, but federal law always supersedes state law. And, which is why the Civil Rights Act, or the Voting Rights Act, rather, until John Roberts declared that there was no more racism in America and therefore he could gut it. That's why the Voting Rights Act prevented states like Georgia from doing exactly what they're doing right now. So there's actually two pieces of legislation. There's H.R. 1 and then there's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act essentially restores the entire Voting Rights Act, which would require Georgia to get pre-clearance before they do these kind of things because they have a history of discriminating against people of color. I don't know that H.R. 1 explicitly does that. So we really need to pass both, which again amplifies the importance of ending the filibuster or modifying it to the point where after all the shouting is done, there is still a vote and the majority wins. Because, we've got this majority right now. It's a majority that's hanging by a thread. I mean, if one, we have a couple of Democratic senators who are in their 80s, Pat Leahy, Dianne Feinstein. I mean, if anything were to happen to any of these people, God forbid, suddenly you've got a Republican-controlled legislature, or you could have. If it was Pat Leahy, Pat Leahy has a Republican. I'm pretty sure there's a Republican governor in Vermont right now. There's not in California, of course, but they're doing their best to recall Gavin Newsom so that they can get one in there. They want to pull another Schwarzenegger thing. So, but yes, these pieces of legislation are crucial to stop this. Laura, thank you so much for the question. Thanks for the call. Coming up next, Congressman Ro Khanna of California will be taking your calls for an entire hour about the issues of the day. If you're on hold right now and you want to talk to Congressman Khanna, Joyce will check in with you. If you want to talk to him, give us a shout. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known of this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not, but fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin can prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe, end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts. As such, for in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Just a reminder, the piece with all the quotes from Milton Mayer and his German friends is posted at the top over at hartmannreport.com. No ads, no cost. You can check it out. I think you'll find it useful and interesting. So let's do a National Progressive Town Hall meeting here with Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at RepRo, as in R-O, RepRo Khanna, and please be sure to say hi to him. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be back on, Tom.
Thank you. So I'm curious, what is at the top of your agenda right now? It's a bizarre time, it seems.
Well, voting right is at the top of the agenda with what happened in Georgia. I mean, I don't know how anyone can watch the video of the African-American state legislator being dragged and arrested for simply knocking on the governor's door and not feel a profound sense of shame at what's taking place in our country and anger. You've had a Georgia governor basically strict voting rights, which is going to impact black people, less places to drop off ballots, more voter ID that disproportionately is going to make it harder for black people to vote. And it was a response to Senator Raphael Warnock being elected. And this is a repeat pattern we see in American history, where you have the Reconstruction followed by redemption. You have progress followed by backlash. And so at this point, passing voting rights is a absolute must do, and we need to ignore the filibuster in doing it.
Yeah, totally with you. Totally with you. Anything else you wanted to point out or highlight, or should we just start picking up phone calls here?
Why don't we go to the call?
Okay, and we'll see what comes out of all that. David in El Paso, Texas, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, a good day, Congressman. My question is regarding the voter ID in this new Georgia law. Is it possible for some sort of a campaign to help raise funds for these people to pay for their voter ID, similar to the way what happened in Florida last year to help the former felons pay for their fines to retain their voting rights?
Well, David, I think our efforts need to be focused first on overturning the law, either legally, which Mark Elias is doing, or through national legislation, which the House and Senate are doing. As you know, the efforts in Florida, while helpful, didn't work nearly as much as they should have. There were still plenty of former felons who were disenfranchised because they couldn't make their payments. And so my fear is that we shouldn't think that a fund is going to enfranchise people who are being systematically disenfranchised by Georgia's state government. That said, if we are unable to succeed in legal measures, I think everything has to be on the table and how we mobilize the community there for a record turnout.
Tamara in Joplin, Missouri, or is it Tamara?
It's Tamara.
Tamara,
yes,
you are on the air with
Congressman,
Congressman Khanna.
I have a question. Last night on Fox News, Sean Hannity called for the overthrow of our democratic country and said that they need to elect a fascist president. How are these people still on the air?
That was actually Tucker Carlson, as I recalled, Tamara. But yeah.
Was it Tucker? Well, it was one of them Fox jokers.
Yeah.
Congressman. I don't know. I haven't seen the clips, but I would just say that there is a rise in this country of authoritarian thinking where people are saying that they would sacrifice democratic institutions and democratic dissent to preserve their cultural way of life. And to me, I'm less concerned about what someone may be spouting off on a television network. I'm more concerned about data suggesting that liberal democracy is not as sacrosanct to the American people as we may have thought.
Yeah, and just for the record, I'm pretty sure that what Tucker Carlson was saying, or maybe even exactly what he said was, if they keep calling us fascist, maybe we should nominate some actual fascists. I think he was being facetious or sarcastic rather than calling for it. But still, they're going there, which is kind of scary. Mark in Framingham, Massachusetts, you are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna. I know in the past you've expressed that you're not in favor of breaking up big tech companies. Given that 90% of the social media market is owned by one of 3 different companies, what do you think about the proposal by Professor Joe Stiglitz to regulate some of these companies, such as Facebook, as a public utility?
Well, Mark, I appreciate that. So I have been for breaking up certain companies. For example, I would consider unwinding Facebook from WhatsApp and from Instagram. I didn't think they should have been allowed to merge. And you're absolutely right that Facebook and Google control 80-90% of the digital ad market, and that really hurts small business. I mean, they have a monopoly basically on what they can price. What I would do is have the platforms be far more open to allow for competitors. So, for example, Apple currently has a exclusive agreement with Google that if you have an iPhone, you basically have a default, you'll have a default Google search. And I wouldn't allow that. I would say that Apple has to have a duty to open that up to many competitors so you can see other competitors emerging, and that I think would be a way of having antitrust get at the problem that you're talking about.
Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We've got about 2 minutes to the break.
Yes, hi, Khanna. I have a question about the minimum wage.
Can you speak up, Dennis? We can't hear you.
Do you believe that the minimum wage should be set by supply and demand?
Dennis, I think that the minimum wage should be set by the federal government, and it should be set at $15. I don't think you can have proper bargaining and good faith transactions between large corporations and big businesses and individuals, especially when those businesses may have monopoly power. So you have a bargaining disadvantage. It's not a good faith transaction of the laws of supply and demand, which is why you need the government to ensure that the markets are fair.
Mark in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom and Representative. I've got a question. So H.R. 1, it's a federal bill designed to protect our voting rights across the country. And Tom, you mentioned last hour that federal law supersedes state law. But since H.R. 1 is a federal bill, would the voting protections apply for all elections? Or like state and local elections, or only federal elections?
I appreciate that, and it would apply for certainly all federal elections, and whether it would apply to local and state elections, I think, is a matter of interpretation. Some of the provisions would, others may not, but basically it is a reinstatement of the Voting Rights Act that this court gutted, that Roberts gutted. That's what gave rise to things like the Georgia laws. They wouldn't have been allowed if they had to get those laws pre-cleared by the Justice Department, as was required by Voting Rights Act Section 5. and now they can be challenged under Voting Rights Act Section 2, but the courts are unlikely to uphold them. Congress would then come in and strengthen the voting rights framework so that the laws would be overturned.
It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. You can find Congressman Khanna's website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, R-E-P, Rep, Ro, R-O, Khanna. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Annie in Sugar Grove, North Carolina. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I called last week to explain my situation, and the representative misunderstood my question. I'm a federal employee retired. I'm under FERS. And he thought that my security was being reduced because of being a federal employee. It was actually the opposite. Because I was getting Social Security, my federal pension was reduced by thousands of dollars once I turned 62. So I just am calling back. It was my Social Security was fine. It was my pension that was reduced because of receiving Social Security. Somewhere in Congress, and I can't find out when it happened, but they didn't want federal workers double dipping. So that's what I'm calling about.
So Annie, now that that's clarified, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
Well, he said, he said he would look into that. So my question is, why federal employees being punished once we get Social Security? My pension went from $18,000 a year.
Were you before 1983? Because I did look into it, or were you after 1983? Do you remember?
I'm a FERS. Something crazy is going on with my phone. Okay, there we go. I'm a FERS. It was December 31, 1984. That Reagan and Reagan.
So you're after 83.
Right. Well, the cutoff was December 31, 84. And I was hired in July of 85. So I'd always been paying Social Security. I was working in the 70s. So, I just turned 66 yesterday. Anyway, so when I turned 62, they're like, oh, we don't want federal workers double dipping. So my pension, my FERS was reduced, my federal employee retirement system.
Yeah. So let's let Congressman Khanna answer.
Well, Annie, I'll look into that. What I looked into, because I thought maybe you were before 1983, where some of the federal employees then were in a different system, and if they paid into Social Security, some of them stopped paying and had their Social Security reduced benefits like cheers, and that needs to be the windfall exception sort of needs to be reversed. I'm on a bill to reverse it. I didn't know about this pension being reduced. I don't think we ought to be reducing that given how much we pay federal workers, but I'm happy to look into if there are any legislative fixes on that.
Yeah. Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Just a minute to the break. Lewis, got a question?
It was kind of long, but basically I saw a poll the other day that said 33% of voters believe that Republicans helped bring in the stimulus bill, but 0 of them voted. Now, what's stopping you guys from getting like transcripts of Congress and showing that 0 Republicans voted for it and putting it on posting it on Twitter, posting it on Facebook, putting it on billboards? Because this is how the big lie worked, because they kept repeating it, and Trump had a whole bunch of people repeating it over and over,
let's
and
get a
spreading
response.
it everywhere.
Louis, it's a great point. Actually, the Speaker warned our caucus about that. That she said, now one Republican has voted for it, but they'll be the first ones to show up to the ribbon cuttings and claim credit for it. And I take your point. We need to do a better job of messaging in making it clear that not a single Republican supported it. They actually tried to block it.
20 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here in our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just 1 minute. Stick around.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So with some fancy footwork math, you can take the GDP of the United States, the productivity, the amount of wealth that is produced, or goods and services that are produced every year by American workers, and divide it by the number of workers, and what you get is that the average worker in America is producing about $75 an hour worth of value for their employer. And the minimum wage pays them about 10% of that value. Now, back in 1950, the minimum wage paid 30% of the value of the productivity that the average worker is producing for their employer. If we took the minimum wage up to $50 an hour tomorrow, it would still be in the neighborhood of 20%. So there's a strong case for increasing the minimum wage based on history. I lay this all out in the new video that we have just for our people who are supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Congressman Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna. I hope one day you run for president before I start. My question is this. Back whenever LBJ signed the first Voting Rights Act, it seems to me that, well, what I don't understand, actually, is how the Supreme Court was able legally to gut that act in order to cause all these problems we now have today. I was wondering if you could explain that to me. If you have already done it for someone else and I missed it, I'm sorry. But thank you very much for all you do.
Well, thank you, ma'am. You're very kind. It's a great question. The Supreme Court basically interpreted this statute as saying that the Voting Rights Act was only going to apply as long as there were racially discriminatory practices in a number of states. And they interpreted it to say that now you've had President Obama, literally I think they talk about Obama's election in the decision, that it shows that we no longer have this kind of racial discrimination, and so Congress must not believe that Section 5 should apply anymore. It was a terrible decision because obviously there is still huge racial discrimination. But I put half the blame on the Supreme Court. I put the other half of the blame on Congress, because it's not like the Supreme Court said constitutionally Congress can't pass a national law on protecting voting rights. It's just they said that the Voting Rights Act is no longer applicable, and so what that meant is Congress needs to act to have a new voting rights law, and that's what the moment calls for today. I mean, I was just, Tom, I know I brought it up in the beginning, but I was just horrified when I saw the black legislator being arrested and dragged out. I thought this must be what it was like in the 1960s. I mean, it was straight out of Jim Crow, those images.
Yep, that was. It may end up being this generation's version of one of those events. It wasn't as bloody as the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but it certainly was as shocking, or it was shocking. I don't want to make comparisons, but David in Las Vegas, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I want to know why someone can't file a wrongful death suit against Trump and his administration, because it qualifies for the four elements of wrongful death suit: is negligence caused by recklessness, breach of duty, which he broke his duty as president, causation, proof of the defendant's negligence caused the death, and damages was number 4. Why can't someone file a wrongful death suit and make it a class action lawsuit?
David, you mean for Trump's leadership on the pandemic? I mean, I think that I think, David, the action should be that he should have been impeached, he should be convicted, and there may be places where he has violated criminal law on. I mean, I think we have to look at what had happened with the insurrection. I think we have to look at his financial activities. I do think that there is a difference between looking at certain potential criminal activities which have to be pursued versus as terrible as there may be judgments which are which are made in the course of democracy that you don't want to criminalize. But I think in Trump's case, there is enough conduct that the Justice Department should look into it.
Ron in Berrien Springs, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Representative Khanna, the investigation with the attempted coup d'etat by Trump and his supporters, are we going to go all the way to the top? What I'm talking about is Virginia Thomas organizing 200 buses. Where did she get that money from? Who financed it? And what was her husband's role, Clarence Thomas? He had to know what was going on. Was he going to swear in Trump after a phony coup d'etat? And here's the thing that really interests me is that this is our Smedley Butler moment. If we do not stop these fascists and find out who, they're going to rise up again, 7 years or 20 years again. They're going to do it again. We have to go after them. No matter how big they are, no matter how rich they are, we're also going to continue. Their fascism will spread. And then we're going to have to fight in the streets and in the country to free ourselves.
Ron, I share your passion about the need for investigation. I saw on my Twitter feed someone had pointed out that, they were so quick to arrest a state legislator for knocking on a door in the Georgia state capitol, and they haven't arrested many of the people who stormed the Capitol. And I think there are a lot of people who need to be held accountable. The investigation has to be far-reaching, and you're right, it has to go wherever it'll lead. And to pull something of that magnitude off, there were a lot of people who were involved. So I completely support a robust, strong investigation. I actually do think the Justice Department is doing that, and one of the places I respect President Biden, which he's been consistent on since he campaigned, is he said he's not going to get involved in that. It's an independent body, and they're going to do the work, and I think he's taking the right attitude.
It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. The Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna, is taking your calls for the hour. You check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepRoKhanna. We'll be right back after this break here at the bottom of the hour with more of your questions for Representative Ro Khanna.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program, our progressive national town hall meeting, right after this. Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan-Nondy Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest divisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers, their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty two-story with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls in our progressive national town hall meeting. And let's see here, Norman, Tampa, Florida. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. How are you doing, Congressman O'Connor? Congressman O'Connor, I want to know when is the committee going to look at the war on drugs being conducted by the DOJ and the DEA, and specifically the targeting of healthcare providers who take care of their patients, and patients that are being denied health care, who are being treated for pain, are being denied and targeted by the Drug Enforcement Agency as being criminals and those sort of things. And what we've asked, we've sent numerous letters to the oversight, and we have become these. I'm a healthcare provider, and we've seemed to become part of the targeting of the DEA's war on drugs, and we've written about this in our blog called "You Are Within the Norms." And so I want to know, when the oversight committee going to take up this type of corruption, because it's beginning to it is interfering with the ability of healthcare physicians, pharmacists, and dentists, providing meaningful health care to our patients without being criminalized or such. And that's my question. And thank you so much.
Norm, you raise an excellent point, and I'm happy to look into it on oversight. But you're absolutely right that the war on drugs has criminalized largely black and brown communities in the United States, and criminalizing or putting at risk of criminal liability healthcare providers. And more broadly, the war on drugs has destabilized a lot of Central America, which is leading in part one of the main causes of the gang violence and the migrant problem that we have. So we need a systematic new approach to this war on drugs that was conceived of in part to suppress minority communities in the United States, to incarcerate minority communities. And I'm happy to look at this particular angle that you raise about its impact on healthcare providers.
Yeah, the Sackler family pushing OxyContin and making billions off it, and getting all kinds of people who really are not in severe pain getting addicted has had this spillover effect now. I think we've overreacted to it. I have a friend who's a physician also, and just pulling her hair out on occasions because she has patients who are having severe acute pain. Somebody has a back injury and they get sciatica and they can hardly walk, and they need like 4 weeks worth of serious narcotics before they can have surgery, and she can't prescribe them. I mean, because of what the Sacklers did. I mean, it's just like they've gone nuts.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, it's going to the other extreme. Well, I'll look into that, because I've heard this now from a number of people that, what Sackler did was outrageous, but you don't want to go to the other extreme and not allow patients legitimate medicine that they may need.
Yeah. When they're in legitimate pain, absolutely. Robert in West Allis, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. My question is this. Last cycle, I spent a lot of time donating, making phone calls, volunteering to get Justice Democrats elected. What I want to know is, when are you guys going to flex your muscle or leverage? I saw votes for lockstep for the CARES Act, which funneled a lot of money to the top. I also saw we didn't force a vote on Medicare for all. And then we had the $15 minimum wage. We had the opportunity to push it. It only would have taken 6 progressives or Justice Democrats, and there's 10, to get that into the legislation. When are we going to see that from you guys? What is the overarching strategy so that we can stop hearing about Joe Manchin and start hearing about what progressives want and enforcing that?
Well, Robert, I appreciate the question, and I've heard this from a number of folks. I think, one, we have to understand where the bill started and what progressives did push, and then I'll answer on the specific issues you mentioned. But remember, the first talk was whether President Biden was going to do a deal with Susan Collins, and he had a group of moderates, and Manchin and Collins and others were pushing for a stimulus bill under $1 trillion. The progressives made sure that we got it at $1.9 billion, that it got the state and local funding, that it didn't eliminate or further means test the checks, that it didn't reduce the child allowance. So we won the frame of the entire bill. some of the centrists may have scored points in the last couple minutes to tinker with the $1.9 trillion bill. But the Progressive Caucus made that a progressive bill. Now, we wanted the $15 minimum wage. We even wrote to Vice President and the President asking them to overturn the parliamentarian. We mobilized with Reverend Barbara Trumka. They decided not to do that. If we were to then vote down a bill that was giving money for child allowance, giving money to families who desperately needed it, that wouldn't have been, in my view, responsible. It may have delayed the process for months. It could have. There's no sense that we would have actually gotten the $15 in. So what do we need to do? We need to mobilize to make sure it's in the next time and make sure that we're continuing to put that as one of our top priorities, push for it. But we are not, and I don't think there are many people in the caucus who believe we ought to be the Freedom Caucus. We actually believe in governing, getting things done, making sure we're help people. And so to blow the place up and at the cost of people making progress is not something we're going to do. That doesn't mean that we're not going to continue the fight for the $15 minimum wage for Medicare for all, or at least expansion of Medicare.
Ben in Oceanside, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. I want to give you a little reality to what's happening with people out here in the real world.
Yes.
First off is I was scared to death when I saw what happened on 1/6, live and on television. And I want to know why. And then, first I was scared, then I was confused, because you had gallows put up on Capitol grounds. You had Congress people, I'm not sure who they were, give guided tours to the people that possibly were insurrectionists, and nothing is being said or done about this. Now, I'm mad because people are not doing anything about it. All they're doing is hitting the pawns in the game, and then the judges are basically setting them free. What are you doing to prevent this from continuing? We have a man down in Mar-a-Lago who instigated the coup and is now trying to continue that slow-rolling coup. What are you doing about it?
Well, I agree with you, and that the previous callers, too, that there are a lot of people out there still who participated in the insurrection, who have threatened the United States, who have threatened certain elected officials, and that there has not been nearly enough investigation or enough arrests. And what we are doing on the Oversight Committee and in general is continuing to demand that the Justice Department and our investigation agencies look into it. I mean, our intelligence agencies ought to be able to figure out who are perpetrating some of the biggest conspiracies and talking about the overthrow of government. And so we are making sure that we are calling for the continued investigation and accountability.
Steve in Marietta, Georgia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, Congressman. One of the things that I think that we're really, lagging on is this minimum wage thing. I mean, so much so that we're shooting our own American workers in the foot. We sit here at $7.25, which is archaic. I mean, it's poverty level minimum wage, and what it's doing is allowing the big corporations to go off into other countries where there are regulations, like Denmark, and pay their workers $22 an hour at the expense of our workers who are getting $7.25, $8 an hour. How can that be? How can we even allow this to continue to happen? $15 is even small. It should be $20, and it shouldn't happen 5 years from now. It should happen this year or next year.
Thank you, Steve.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, $7.25 is outrageous. The average worker is producing $23 of value for the economy. They're not being paid what they're producing. The market isn't working. Labor is the value of their labor is basically being taken from them and distributed back to shareholders. So it's overdue. It's my top priority and a lot of the progressives' top priority to keep pushing for it this year.
It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting with the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna of California. His website, khanna.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we will be back. More of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, thank you. Good day, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Best weekend wishes to both of you. Congressman Khanna, as Tom opened the show with, and as President Biden declared yesterday, the overriding issue before us is democracy versus autocracy, and the future is not going to be won with the gun. It's going to be won by showing how democracy works for the many as opposed to the select few in the case of fascism. And in my opinion, not only must Democrats pass H.R. 1 and begin building back greener, we need to document and indict the Trump administration's criminal negligence and malfeasance that the hundreds of thousands of needless deaths of Americans from COVID. Congressman Khanna, will there be a commission set up to expose this catastrophic tragedy? Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Jeff. There should be a commission. I've called for a commission both to look at the colossal mismanagement during the pandemic and the misinformation, and separately to look at the insurrection and the storming of the Capitol and the breakdown there. I believe it ought to actually be bipartisan. There are enough Republicans we can find to make sure that there's an accountability, and it ought to function like the 9/11 Commission. We actually had reports that were acted on. So I completely agree with you. You can't just move past it and sweep it under the rug without recognizing that there were systemic failures in our democracy that have to be addressed and fixed.
Robert in Kimberly, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Representative. I second the motion for you to run for president. I just wanted to check in on the status of the bill from Senator Jeff Markley here in Oregon about the Electric Cars Act. And
yes, I'm on it.
It's yeah, I saw that, and I tweeted my question out actually because I get nervous making these calls. So, anyways, and then is it in the is it going to be in the next stimulus bill? Do you suspect?
Thank you, Robert.
Robert, I hope it is. I know Senator Merkley is pushing for it. It makes sense to have electric vehicles as a focus. It makes sense to also have batteries as a focus. As you probably know, the lithium-ion batteries, we're not making them in the U.S. They require cobalt, which is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and China is basically getting it from the Democratic Republic of Congo in a form of, by the way, neo-colonialism. The most brutal form of colonialism in the world in history was Belgian colonialism in Congo, and China is now getting the cobalt from there. But that means that the United States needs to have a new strategy to produce these lithium-ion batteries, or we can't have the electric vehicles. So an infrastructure bill has to also be reindustrializing America, and Merkley is pushing for that. Markey is pushing for that. Schumer is pushing for that. I'm hopeful that that's what the bill will be, not just roads and highways and bridges that are needed, but more building the modern infrastructure industrial base for America.
You know, there used to be a rare earths mine in California, and I think they were pulling cobalt out of there. I know they were pulling some other things out of it, germanium and things like that. Has anybody, is it being reopened, do you know?
That's a great question, Tom. I don't know. We'll look into that. But I know we haven't really done much on cobalt, and we've got even the car companies are saying they can't make electric vehicles because of the shortage on batteries.
Yeah, I remember like 15 years ago, in fact, I talked on this program, we had an expert on, that mine was closed because the Chinese were undercutting the market so radically that, you know, it just was not profitable anymore. But it's there.
I'll into it.
Anyhow,
that's a great
yeah,
point.
Thank you. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. This week in the Science Revolution is Dr. Justin Frank, author of the Trump, Obama, and Bush on the Couch series of books. He's here on how to deal with the trauma of the pandemic and the trauma of 4 years of Trump. It's been a stressful time. Some of us have lost family and friends and have found it difficult to stay safe and pay the bills. The Trump years have been a challenge to democracy and our sanity. Dr. Justin Frank is here to help. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Khanna.house.gov. Ro Khanna on Twitter. Gail in Antelope, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. Congressman Khanna, I would like to know if there is going to be any action taken against the Director and Associate Director of Social Security. From all of the news reports I've read, that the IRS requested the payment information for direct deposit for Social Security recipients 2 weeks before the bill was signed on March 12th. And they deliberately slow-walked that information and did not provide that information to the IRS until actually Thursday of this week, after a demand letter was sent by the House Ways and Means Committee, which basically delayed and held up the payments for the stimulus, not only to Social Security, but SSI, SDI, and veterans. Basically, those two people need to be fired for gross incompetence. And I believe there have been demands for President Biden to do that, and I basically agree they need to be fired. If they're not, they are going to basically try to discredit the Biden administration and everything he does. And if he needs someone to walk with their pink slips over, I will be more than happy to volunteer to do that.
These are Trump holdovers.
You, Gail. I love your passion, and I share your sense of outrage. I don't understand what happened in terms of, I read the same reports. It seems outrageous. You're absolutely right to also focus on the veterans and those on SSI and SSD. For many people who are out of work, injured, disabled, that's their livelihood. They can't survive without it. As it is, it's too little. I think SSI, last I checked, was $730 a month, and SSDI has a lot of restrictions. But it was outrageous. It's outrageous that they didn't get the checks in. Oversight is going to be investigating it and seeing what the rationale was, and then we need to have accountability.
Keith in Garden Valley, Idaho. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thank you very much for putting me on. I just wanted to ask, I know that a lot of the issues that come around every week get emails from Democrats. I don't subscribe to any Republican things, but just like, for example, H.R. 1, I'm getting all these emails, and they want money. They take a little survey, and then they want money at the very end. It's not very much, but how come it is almost every issue they need money? What do they do? Doesn't Congress act without running ads for people, or is that what it is? They want people to call in and urge the congressman to help, or why do they need so much money to pass these things from the public?
Keith, it's a great question. The candid truth is that they don't need money to pass these things. These things are based on the procedures in committee and in Congress. But Congress has become a need to have a perpetual campaign because the other side, the Republicans, are engaged in a perpetual campaign. And if you're not communicating, if you're not organizing, and the other side is, then you will be losing. And so a lot of the emails you get, the resources they raise, are probably going into ads to explain HR 1 or the rescue plan, or to organize around it, and to be campaigning because the Republicans are campaigning.
Pat in Columbia, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman, I'd like to ask you about Kavanaugh and Thompson. Kavanaugh is under investigation about sexual harassment, and Thomas' wife has been taking money from organization, and I'm wondering, is any investigation doing under that? I know the one under Kavanaugh is, but I don't know about the one under Thomas, because that's 2 seats that y'all can get.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think the Judiciary Committee should look into that. They should have those investigations. Obviously, it's a high bar to remove someone if we require 2/3 in the Senate, which we wouldn't have. But that's not a reason to let things slide. I think there ought to be accountability. One of the things I've called for, that Elizabeth Warren actually had called for, is that there ought to be an independent agency that looks at government corruption of Congress or federal agencies or judges. It's not right for Congress to be managing prosecutorial investigations. We have too much work to do in actually an agenda, and we don't have the skill to do that. And so I think, like most modern democracies, we need a separate agency that can look at the type of issues you raise about the justices.
Minute and a half to the end of the hour. Barbara, Chicago Heights, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning. Tom, you might want to mention to your
listeners on a regular basis that the minimum wage can be passed via a defense bill, so they don't keep thinking that we're not going to get the minimum wage passed. And Representative Khanna, my question is, at the Rules Committee meeting this week, the Attorney General from Indiana profusely threatened several times that the minute H.R. 1, Senate Bill 1, is passed and the John Lewis Act is passed, that they're going to take those bills into court. And you know they're going to take them all the way to the Supreme Court. So what are we going to do? What's the strategy to make sure that those bills, once they're passed and become law, don't get overturned by the Supreme Court?
Well, I appreciate both of your points here. First of all, you're absolutely right. The last time the minimum wage increased to $7.25, it was through the National Defense Authorization Act. The problem with that now is I'm not sure the administration is going to risk losing Republican votes in the Senate, which may be needed to pass the defense authorization bill in order to have the wage. So it's one avenue, but it's not a slam dunk. On your other point, we need to make sure that the president gets his commission up on the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court knows that if they blatantly violate interpretations of the Constitution, then Supreme Court reform is on the table.
That is a great idea. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
My pleasure. Congressman Ro Khanna of California. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan-Nondi Water Authority
And while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles from their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed up to 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earn wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. By Robin and Harley Zephyr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just on the science front, a couple of quick headlines here. The new data is showing that people infected with the B1351 variant of COVID, this is the so-called South African variant, actually develop immune responses that allow them to fight off all the other variants, which is interesting. So scientists are now trying to figure out how to use this particular variant as basically the core ingredient of a monoclonal antibody that can be used as a treatment. And hopefully there's more widespread use of these monoclonal antibodies. My best friend in New York, Jerry, got just right after he got his COVID shot, came down with COVID. Yeah, I think it was the first time he'd been out of the house in a year and got COVID and ended up in the hospital. And they were talking about putting him on a ventilator. And the doctor said, and he said, can I get the monoclonal antibodies? And the doctor was like, nah, it's you're too far along, and we just we're not using them that much. You need to stick up for yourself. And my friend didn't, but he's well now. He finally got on the other side of it, but it was a difficult time. Octopuses dream. And when they dream, the colors on the outside of their body shift. This is fascinating. They think that we have a common ancestor with them, but that was 500 million years ago. So it seems that octopuses might have developed this two-stage sleep pattern like we have separately from us, but nobody's really sure. And finally, they have found an insect that it's the Bemisi tabaki is the name of it. It's called a white fly, or a type of white fly. This insect actually swiped a gene from plants. Now genes are, DNA is not supposed to be able to move from plants to animals, and this happened apparently millions of years ago. It swiped this gene, and therefore it can eat plants that produce toxins to kill bugs and be resistant to them because it's got the same gene the plant does. So just amazing stuff that's happening in the world of science. This is from nature.com. I get a daily briefing from them that's just absolutely fascinating. And finally, there's another study that was just published that almost 500,000 COVID infections could have been prevented in the United States, and 9,000 lives could have been saved had we had a nationwide ban on shutting off people's water because they can't afford to pay their water bills. Because what was happening, it's continuing to happen, is people lose their jobs because of COVID. They can't pay their bills. They can't pay their water bills. The city shuts off the water to their home. Then, knowing that there's no water to the home is declared uninhabitable, and the city comes along and slaps a big red sign on the front of the house and forces everybody out of the house, and suddenly you got people who are now homeless. Or they're moving in with friends and family, and now you've got high-density living and a more rapid spread of COVID. So just this one thing, shutting off water to people, which is insane, right? I mean, water and air, breathing and drinking are like two, even above food, are two of the things that keep us alive. That any city shut off anybody's water for any reason just strikes me as insane. But this is happening all across the country, particularly in areas where the water utilities are private for-profit companies. And because of this, according to this research, 500,000 COVID infections happened because of this, and 9,000 people died as a consequence of these. This is research that was just published by Cornell University and the national advocacy group Food and Water Watch. And you can find it over at Food and Water Watch's website. So, anyhow, the stuff that's on my mind. Let's see what's on your mind. It's Anything Goes Friday. Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey there, Tom. How are you? I've been thinking about gun control legislation, and it seems to me that we've really overthought this a lot. You're familiar with the 1939 Act that rendered full automatic machine guns, got them out of the hands of criminals basically because they put a tax on full automatics. Why is it that we don't do the same with semi-automatics?
I think it's a great idea, Tim. I don't think most Americans even understand how this works. Fully automatic, these so-called Tommy guns that Al Capone and his buddies were using in the 1930s to shoot up places during the Prohibition Wars, and then later bank robbers and things like that. Those weapons were never outlawed in the United States. You can still shoot, and you can still own a Tommy gun. In fact, I fired them. There was a gun range in Georgia when we lived in Marietta, and that I used to go to for shooting. This was around the time I was going through the Georgia Police Academy, and they had Thompsons. They had which is again one of these banned guns. Fully automatic. They had fully automatic Uzis, and they were great fun to shoot. You'd put a watermelon up there, or even a target. Yeah. But the thing is, you got to pay this outrageous tax, and you've got to get a permit from ATF, and it's really, really hard to get that permit. You have to prove that, like, for example, you're a gun range and you're just going to rent them to people. But if you want to buy one, it's extremely difficult and extremely expensive, but they're not illegal. They are simply taxed. And if we did the same thing with all semi-automatic weapons, I think, not necessarily quite as draconian, we could go just halfway, but I think it would take a lot of those guns off the streets. You wanted to add something, Tim?
I did. And also, in 1939, part of that act, we even have precedent and language from the Supreme Court. In the United States versus Miller in 1939, part of that 1934 act, they wanted to get rid of it because of the short-barrel shotguns. Sawed-off shotguns were included in that. And the court stated that there was no evidence that a sawed-off shotgun had reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. Now, that's the language. Put that in today's context. If a short-barreled shotgun wasn't reasonable to a well-regulated militia in 1939, how good is a semi-automatic going to be against a tank, a drone, and a nuclear missile?
Right. Right, which is the ridiculousness of people who think that they can amass a small armory in their bedroom of a couple of dozen guns, and they're going to successfully take on the FBI or, for that matter, the U.S. Army. I mean, it's just fantasy.
The Supreme Court language thought it unreasonable in 1939. I think we could almost make a lawsuit and use the same language against them to make the same argument.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tim, and hopefully somebody will come to that conclusion. Maybe there's a good Democratic legislator listening right now, or even a Republican. I mean, these things cross party lines pretty readily. Harold, thank you for the call. Harold in Thomasville, Georgia. Hey, Harold, up. We have about a minute to the break. What's on your mind?
Okay, I would like to hear you repeatedly go against Senator Tim Scott because he is voting against 40% of the interests of his constituents and 100% of African Americans by supporting Republicans against H.R. 1. I am personally offended by that. I'm a black man. I vote all the time, and I think he should be ashamed of himself.
I wonder if he might be, I think it's unlikely because he's really towed the right-wing line, but if he might be the one Republican that Joe Manchin thinks he can bring in on this thing. I don't know. It's got to be just twisting Tim Scott into pretzels. It's got to be really tough on him. But I don't know, Harold. I'm not you live in Georgia. You're a whole lot closer to him. He's the senator from, as I recall, South Carolina. And I don't know. It's a good question. Harold, thank you for the call. I get your outrage. I share your outrage. But at the end of the day, it's up to Tim Scott to decide what Tim Scott is going to do. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll also add, Harold, as a black man, I think you have standing, essentially, to call out Tim Scott. I'm not sure I do. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
So I think the single most important thing that we all need to be talking about over and over and over and over again is the model of democracy that Taiwan has set into motion, which emanated from their Sunflower Movement, which began on March 18, 2014. And finding consensus, finding hidden consensus, but practically speaking, using these virtual platforms called Polis and artificial intelligence to find hidden consensus. That's the key, not just consensus, but the hidden consensus. And they've used this successfully, and that's why they're still alive. And you know, the interesting thing about Taiwan's democracy, and I think it's a fascinating point, is that they don't have the baggage of American democracy. They had an authoritarian society up until recently. We have this mythology that's formed from the American Revolution that really keeps us mired. And you know, I think these technologies are being rolled out all across the world slowly, but the democracy has an inherent flaw, and the flaw is that it's adversarial. We shake our fists in the air and rail against one another, and all we do is sow division. And they've stopped doing that, and that's the point that I wanted to make.
The difference between the United States and Taiwan is twofold. Number one, in Taiwan, it is not legal to bribe legislators like it is here in the United States. And so they don't, the corrupting power of big money is not a variable in their elections and in their electoral process and their legislative process. Secondly, they don't have a massive right-wing infrastructure like we have here in the United States. This morning, when I was finishing up the work, Louise and I started writing it last night, the piece that's up on HartmannReport.com, the article about you know, the old Nazis and literally for the German Nazi or the Germans who survived the Nazis, telling us here's how they did it. You know, as I was going through that, I was looking for an article about how Brian Kemp refused to put 53,000 African Americans on the voting rolls in the months before he ran against Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams had gotten those people registered to vote. Brian Kemp refused to put them on the rolls. I plugged that into two different search engines, Google and DuckDuckGo, and in both cases, the first 20 or 30 hits that I got were all right-wing sites that were either denying that it happened, pretending it didn't happen, calling Stacey Abrams a liar, whatever. And it was like in the 30 to 40, in the fourth page, was the third or fourth page. That was where I found the actual article about this. Every single one of these sites were right-wing sites. They are very well funded. They're using search optimization, search engine optimization, SEO techniques to get to the top of these things. And I don't know if there's some bias inside Google for that matter, but you know, that's what's happening. And then you've got the corruption of Facebook as well, you know, with enormous amounts of money.
What Taiwan is doing is an antidote to the corruption that we see from social media.
I get it, but what happens when a billionaire says, okay, we'll provide the platform?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this can be rolled out in a very small local way, and it will gain traction.
Okay, I've got to learn more about it, Jonathan. Thanks for waking me up. I appreciate the call. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3120. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So the Republican Party has sold themselves way back all the way to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. And Pete in Newport, Oregon. Hey, Pete, what's on your mind today?
All right, Tom. I think I'm going to win every book. So for the bill that benefited the average American, that was introduced by a Republican, had a majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate, and signed by a Republican. H.R. 395 that established the National Do Not Call Registry was sponsored by Billy Tausend, a Republican, had 219 Republican yeas to 5 nays, and a unanimous consent in the Senate by all senators. And then George W. Bush signed it into law.
Okay, well, Pete, I'm going to put you on hold so that Joyce can get your information. Let me do a little digging and, just confirm that what you said is actually the case. And if so, you have made history. So
thank you. And it's H.R. 395.
395. I wrote it down. And Joyce will get all the detail to me. Hang on just a second here. Pete in Newport, Oregon, thank you very much. It'd be interesting. Somebody finally, after 18 years, wins the prize, right? Stephen in Kula, Hawaii. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to recommend to everybody this new documentary that just came out on Netflix week. It's called Seaspiracy, Sea as in Oceans. It's all about what's going on in the oceans, how vital they are to us. If the oceans die, we die. And it goes into human slavery, climate change, dolphins, whales, and all the plastics. And it all relates to the fishing industry. I mean, like the plastics, most of the plastics in our ocean are not from, human garbage. It's from all the nets and other stuff from the fishing industry. It's a really good documentary. I really recommend it.
And you said it's Netflix?
Yeah, it just came out on Wednesday. I just watched it the other night.
Is it Netflix original, or is it, just one that they happen to carry?
It's one that they happen to carry. It's kind of a sequel to Cowspiracy, if you ever saw that one.
I didn't see Cowspiracy. I recall hearing about it when it came out. I'll have to check it out. Stephen, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that and looking forward to finding out more about it. Rich in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Morning, Tom. Thank you very much. I wanted to highlight the Chinese slavery of Xinjiang and how right now it was reported this morning that there are Magnitsky Act sanctions against individuals in the Chinese government, and it's being done on or with the assistance of multiple nations, and the Chinese are hitting back real hard. And the clothing manufacturer from Sweden, it's 2 letters, I don't remember, I've never shopped there. They were part of this. Okay, yeah, they're red letters.
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
You're right. I think you're right. And they're being boycotted in China by a huge social media campaign that the government has spawned. And so here's this whole big rigmarole going on, all for the Chinese government to be able to use slave labor and crush these people in their nation that they consider to be potential trouble, the Uyghurs. And I've got an idea. Because the Chinese government has taken it upon themselves to activate outrage and say that this clothing manufacturer shouldn't be purchased from, they have just stepped into something that, even though they will work hard to control it, they are creating a model for people to become outraged and act out. And I think that it's time for my meme, which is eat the panda. 9 out of 10 endangered species agree, eat the panda. You've got elephants saying, eat the panda. You've got tigers saying, eat the panda. You've got penguins saying, eat the panda.
What are you talking about, Rich?
Well, the Chinese government has a genetics program, and they are cranking out baby panda like it's Hot Pockets. And
really?
If you create this silly thing that is, I'm trying to remember what a modest proposal is designed as. The idea that you say, eat the panda because every 25 minutes an elephant dies for its ivory, and basically ivory chopsticks demand it. Make room on your plate for panda. And it's Belt and Road that has created the infrastructure of corruption in Africa that is killing elephants and spiriting their ivory back to the largest place to sell ivory on the planet. What do you think?
Right, which is China. Yeah, I get it. No, in fact, I've seen ivory markets in China. This was back in the 80s, but yes.
Right.
Rich, thanks for the call. I don't know about eat the panda. As a vegetarian, not at the top of my list, but I totally get what you're saying. Fascinating. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We have some of the most creative listeners out there. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate. The offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials,
The Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Anything Goes Friday on our program. Sally in Roundup, Montana. Hey, Sally, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good morning. I have a question, and I've not heard the answer to it. If you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, what keeps prices from going so high that people are pushed back to making $7 an hour? Thank you.
The principal thing that keeps that from happening, Sally, is that wages are a very, very small slice of the cost of the vast majority of products. In Denmark, for example, people start working at McDonald's at the equivalent of $23 an hour U.S., and McDonald's hamburgers in Denmark sell for about 1% more than they do in the United States, for about 40 or 50 cents more, or whatever it is. It's a very small amount, because the labor is actually a very small part of the cost. And that's true of the vast majority of products. There are a few areas where labor is a larger cost. For example, if you go to a physician, you're paying mostly for the labor, not, although some of what you pay is going to pay for the office and for the equipment and for their computer systems and everything else. But the vast majority of products, labor is a small piece of it, number one. And then the second thing is that even if labor were a larger part of the cost, large companies like McDonald's can easily absorb that simply by reducing their executive compensation or reducing their dividends, which is what they used to do back in the day when we had unions and people were working at GM starting at, in today's dollars, $40 an hour. Today at GM, they don't start at $40 an hour anymore. They start at $14.50 an hour. And so, but back then, GM was paying dividends just fine. It's just that their CEO is only making $1 million a year instead of $30 or $50 million a year. So, and again, I think the big point that needs to be made, Sally, is that the minimum wage was introduced in the 1930s. I forget which year. I think it was 35, but I could be wrong. But it was during, it was part of the New Deal programs of FDR. And it has been raised more or less 30 times since then. And some of those raises have been substantial. There was one raise that was a more than 40% raise in the minimum wage. And we're talking now about 100% raise, doubling it. If the minimum wage had ever, in the, what's it been now, 90 years since it was introduced, if in those 90 years the minimum wage had ever even once caused a measurable increase in prices or inflation, every Republican in the country would have memorized that year. They would be saying, you don't want it to happen like it did in 1977. Oh, my God, it was terrible. Inflation went up 2%, and McDonald's raised their prices from 25 cents to 35 cents for a burger. You don't. They would have that day memorized. But the fact of the matter is that the minimum wage has gone from, literally 10 or 15 cents back in the 30s to $7.50 an hour now. And it has been raised numerous times, and it has never had that kind of an impact for those reasons. Answer your question, Shelley? Apparently I did. Thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. Tabitha in Riverside, California. Hey, Tabitha, what's on your mind?
Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to talk about Israel, because whenever I do hear it brought up, it's like always something against Israel. But from all my knowledge of Israel, these people would love to live in peace with those around them. But the people in the PLO do not recognize them to this day as a state. And they really have to live on the defensive and offensive, because there are people who to this day want to take Israel out, don't believe they have a right there, and that's why they have to be overly cautious. It's not that they hate anybody. They would love, in fact, Arabs and Christians, they all live there. The peaceful ones can live in there, and they would love to open it up, but there is a strain of people who want to take and would take Israel out, and to this day they get bombed. They have bomb shelters there, and that's why they have to retaliate and live on the defense. And I just wanted to say that they do have a right to be there. It's been established officially, and unfortunately to this day, they have to live protecting themselves. And that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Tabitha, and I spent a fair amount of time in Israel back in the 70s and 80s. I haven't been there in a decade or more, but back then you could, in fact I did frequently, drive all the way from Jericho in the south, all the way up to, through Jerusalem, all the way up through the central part, right up to Nazareth and on up, right up to the, I'm forgetting the name of the sea, the small sea where, Jesus was to have walked on the waters. And, in your car, and, the Sea of Galilee, thank you. And there, in fact, our friends who lived there were living on the second floor of a house that was owned by an Arab family. And, people were interacting fairly well. That is not the case anymore. The series of right-wing governments, the Netanyahu government being the most recent, have basically turned Israel into an apartheid state with this massive partitioning of internally in Israel, and then the basically, a 3 million person prison camp. I believe there's 3 million people in Gaza. I might be wrong on the number, but whatever it is, this Gaza has basically been turned into a prison camp. And there's a robust discussion about this in Israel, and there is a progressive media there. If you read Haaretz, Haaretz, I believe it is, they have a website. You can read the newspaper, the left-wing newspaper, or you can read the Jerusalem Post, which is more of a right-wing newspaper. Shelley Adelson used to fund, he's dead now, he may still be funding it, an extremely right-wing anti-Arab newspaper that was given away for free all over Israel. That was just kind of feeding this frenzy. You've got two political parties that Netanyahu has formed a coalition with that are both essentially in favor of just expelling all Arabs from Israel, period, end of discussion. And the country is facing some really serious challenges as the Arab population grows.
Well, one thing we know that according to the Bible, God's always going to protect it. Not that it's always right, but.
Yeah, well, maybe. I really hope for the best for Israel.
As I said, but it is. I know I don't want to get too biblical here, but I can't argue with God. We're creatures. God is the creator, and Israel is His country, and the Antichrist is going to go there and all that. So it gets involved. Okay. But I just feel for Israel because they do have to be on the defense. God bless you, Tom, and all your listeners. Bye.
Thank you, and back at you, Tabitha. I'll take all the blessings I can get. And we'll just leave that there. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'd like to comment on the wage increase. I heard another caller saying that if we raise the minimum wage, the price of the products are going to go up. I did a little bit of investigating myself in the metropolitan St. Louis area. Went to a poor neighborhood McDonald's. Got me a quarter pounder with cheese combo, then went to a wealthy part of St. Louis, got the same thing. The difference between the two was 22 cents. Now, when I was purchasing both of these in these separate McDonald's franchises, I asked the manager, what's the starting wage? Well, it's $7.25 in the poor neighborhood. It's $15 in the wealthy neighborhood. Now, the only thing I can think of is since it's a franchise, I believe they get to set their own wage, the starting wage. I don't know. What say you?
I don't know. I'm surprised that it wasn't more expensive in the neighborhood and less expensive in the wealthy neighborhood. That's typically how it works. That's how it works with supermarkets. You find that poor people.
There's food deserts. I went to the food desert part of St. Louis, and the McDonald's was cheaper.
Yeah, it may be. And if everything you said is true, Steve, then the difference was 22 cents, you said?
That is correct.
Yeah, I'd pay 22 cents more for a burger if I ate burgers.
It had nothing to do with a coupon to make it cheaper.
I get all that. And I thought McDonald's standardized their prices across the country. Apparently they don't, if everything is true. But I would be glad to pay 22 cents more for a veggie burger at McDonald's. And yes, they're offering them now. If that meant that everybody working there was being paid $15 an hour. And I don't think that it would have an inflationary impact. Steve, thank you for the call. Again, let me qualify this by saying if everything Steve said is true, because people call in all the time and throw numbers out, and it's like, I can't verify that. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservative. Stick around. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring up something totally off topic, and that's Queen Charlotte. There is no proof historically that she had a black ancestor, and if she did,
Wait a second. Stop for a second. Who is Queen Charlotte?
Queen Charlotte is George III's wife. She was the Princess
George
of
III in the
Mecklenburg.
1780s?
Yes. She was George III's wife, the Princess of Mecklenburg in Germany. And it goes back to the 1200s and King Alfonso of Portugal, who supposedly had a Moorish mistress. That's where the problem is, because historians say that being a Moor at that time in Iberia, she could have been an Iberian whose forebears had become Muslim, or she could have been a Berber from North Africa, or an Arab, and the possibility of her being a sub-Saharan African was pretty small. She could have been, though. But anyway, there would have been 9 generations in 500 years if she was a descendant of this woman. And
Dennis, why is this relevant? What am I missing here? Why are we discussing, the 1780, the wife of the king, today in 2021?
It's something you said last week on your show when somebody brought up Queen Charlotte. Maybe you don't remember, but
I don't.
You sort of you validated this sort of revisionist history. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
My apologies.
What's true about Queen Charlotte is, of the dozens of paintings of her, there's 2 in which, if you look at them, and they were probably done when she was fairly young, in her 20s or even teens, you could kind of think that maybe she looked like a mulatto. And one writer at that time, when she was queen, described her as being ugly and having a mulatto face. But
a word that probably we shouldn't be using these days. It's become, it's not the N-word, but it's become another slur.
Exactly.
But and it's just a word for mixed race people. Or I shouldn't just say just. But okay, Dennis.
Yeah.
I totally get it. Is it that the British royal family is trying to say we've always had some black blood in our lineage, and therefore what's the big hysteria around around Meghan? Is that what brought this to forward?
No, this goes back about 24 years ago. An historian from Belize by the name of Valdez, he came up with this theory. And he claimed that there was a black branch of the Portuguese family. There was a Maria de Souza de Castro who married a French count. She would have, in the 1400s, she would have been Charlotte's 5th great-grandmother. And there's no proof that this mistress, that she was a descendant of the mistress of Alfonso III anyway. So
wow. You have so far exceeded my knowledge of European royalty. Dennis, thank you for the call, and I'm sorry if I was promoting revisionist history or hustling for something that was wrong. If I did, it was inadvertent. I like I said, I frankly have no recollection of it. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. This week on The Science Revolution is Dr. Justin Frank, author of the Trump, Obama, and Bush on the Couch series of books. He's here on how to deal with the trauma of the pandemic and the trauma of 4 years of Trump. It's been a stressful time. Some of us have lost family and friends and have found it difficult to stay safe and pay the bills. Trump years have been a challenge to democracy and our sanity. Dr. Justin Frank is here to help. Tune into The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Mike in Fontana, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I was going to ask the congressman from California, these gun restrictions and everything. We can put all kind of laws up and, American people and allow law-abiding citizens. But I just want to ask him, what's he going to do about the 300,000 gangbangers he's got out here in California?
Well, that's what law enforcement is for, Mike.
Yeah, we got 100,000. You got 100,000 in Texas, You got.
Are you trying to make the
homeless.
argument that because there are, and it's not just, Puerto Ricans or blacks who are in gangs, there are also white gangs. In fact, we saw several of these white gangs attack the Capitol building on January 6th, and they were just as well armed with the same kind of weapons. And they regularly attack people of color as well. I'd say right across the board, to the extent that we have gang problems in the United States, this is a law enforcement issue. It's, we should do something about, with and about for gun control. That is not going to be some kind of a panacea to our crime problem. They're completely separate issues. Jake in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jake, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering if you had come up with a short, quippy, and true statement that we, the people, could use to fight back against the alt-right short, quippy, and false, and something that would include we, the people, retaking control from the oligarchs.
To fight back against, I'm sorry, I missed a word or two there.
Okay, I'll try to repeat it again. Is there anything there, any short, quippy, or true statement that you can think of that would help unite we, the people, against the oligarchs that have taken over the country?
Oh, the oligarchs, yeah, okay, yeah. America should be for we the people should be for we the people, not them the oligarchs. I mean, or something like that. I don't. Jake, let me think about that, and if I can come up with something, I'll do my very best to push it out. Jake, I appreciate the call. Ron in Chicago. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Yes, concerning the ExxonMobil oil spill. At the time, were there icebergs in the area of the accident? Do you know?
No, there were not. To the best of my knowledge, there were not.
That's the excuse the crew gave. And also, there was more bad environmental news. There is a report that there is a 10-foot predatory fish that lives in the Amazon, and now it has been found in Florida. I don't know if you heard
Oh,
that.
boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff showing up in Florida, and it's a tough one. Thank you, Ron. Thanks for the call. Marco in Los Angeles. Hey, Marco, what's up?
What's up is, number one, your book, Second Amendment, Guns, and the history of the Second Amendment. I've used it, and it covers all aspects of fixing our gun situation, but that's not what I'm calling about. I just want to thank you for that book. The other thing is that since government, or now our government, is saying that people are... corporations are people, yet Paul Ryan and Moscow Mitch McConnell and Trump created a tax bill that has corporations paying 21% and people paying 35%. You can't have it both ways. You can't call corporations people and tax them 21%. So my suggestion is this April 15th, everybody sign their tax form. Don't send in the money. Wake
that's not a form of protest, Marco. That's a way of getting yourself in trouble.
That was the first. Taxation without representation. That's exactly what we're going through.
I know that was the slogan, but I'm telling you, I've seen this movie before. In fact, I've told this story before. When I was 16 years old and I was working in radio at WITL in Lansing, Michigan, or maybe it was when I was 17 or 18, but whatever. A guy from one of the federal agencies plus a local state police guy stopped by our radio station and said, we're going to be doing a tax bust down the road here. We're going to be hauling a couple of tax protesters off. They're refusing to pay their taxes. We would appreciate it if you did not report on it because we don't want this to spread. And that provoked an ethical debate within our newsroom about whether we report on that or not, which is a whole other story. But the point is that was like in 1968, or 67. That was in the late 60s. These so-called tax protests have been around for a long, long time, and they tend not to end well. There are a lot of ways that you can protest corporations paying a fraction of the taxes, but I would never suggest to somebody that paying their taxes is not paying their taxes how they should do it. Noah in Muncie, Indiana. Hey Noah, we have 1 minute to the end of the show today, the end of the week.
Hi Tom. First time caller. I'll try to get to the point. My question pertains to ageism and the growing rise of that problem in America. I'm a millennial. I'm a teacher. I'm a writer. In 2016, I warned my colleagues about revenge voting, and they didn't believe me, but by 2020 they did. And then we have
forgive the interruption, but it's the end of the show. This is a great topic, and I'd love to talk to you about it in more depth. If you could please call back next week. I'm sorry that it's not a good topic for just to slam something out. Noah, thank you very much for the call. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Gerald Lindbergh, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabberwocky, and Jay LeBlanc, the folks who help make this program work every single day. And thank you to you for sharing the good work about us, or the good word about us with your friends. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.